come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Today, the Subcommittee on the Interior will examine the problem of invasive species in the U.S. and the effectiveness of the federal government's attempts to control and eradicate invasives. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service specifically defines an invasive as an exotic species whose introduction into an ecosystem in which the species is not native causes or is likely to cause environmental or economic harm or harm to human health. There are currently almost 50,000 such species living in the United States. Not be a test on how many of those you can name. The impact of invasive species is hard to ignore. They're one of the leading causes of population decline and extinction in native plants and animals. They cause billions of dollars per year in damages across the country. Recently, the Department of the Interior estimated that it spends $100 million annually on invasive species management. In response to this significant and growing problem, President Clinton created the National Invasive Species Council in 1999. This council is co-chaired by the Secretaries of Interior, Agriculture, and Commerce. Its mission is to coordinate the work of numerous agencies to address and eradicate invasive species. Part of the council's job is to produce a national management plan every 2 years for the treatment and eradication of endangered species. Since 1999, the Council has only released 2 plans, one in January of 2001 and nearly 8 years ago in 2008. A review of the 2001 plan by the Government Accountability Office found problems with coordination, delays, and setting clear long-term goals. In the past several years, there's been relatively little oversight of the Council's work and success in managing the invasive species problem. Questions continue to be raised about whether the Council and other federal agencies are effectively treating certain invasive species. The spread of these news is startling. 2 years ago, Dr. George Beck testified before the House Committee on Natural Resources about the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of the Council and the federal government in treating invasive weeds. Dr. Beck warned that invasive weeds were spreading at a far faster pace that questioned the government's claims about the amount of land infested with non-native weeds that it successfully treated in previous years. He also cast doubts on whether the Council was using the most cost-efficient means of fighting invasive species. This hearing will allow the Council to update us on its progress. In addition, we'll look at the impact of 3 invasive species that have caused significant and costly headaches for my home state of Wyoming, as well as Ranking Member Lawrence's home state of Michigan. Mr. Hurd will also raise some issues in his district in Texas. The nuisance and dangers of these particular non-native species provide startling illustrations of the harmful effects of endangered species and the need for capable treatment efforts. Our witnesses today bring a broad and diverse knowledge of invasive species and the havoc they wreak on our country. We will hear from the Executive Director of the Council on its work. We will also hear from 3 experts who've studied the risks of invasive species in America and can provide insight into the importance and urgency of addressing this issue. As the problem of invasive species in America worsens, we must continue to revisit and reassess the situation and our treatment and eradication efforts. I look forward to the hearing, and I look forward to our witnesses' testimony, and I want to thank you for being here today. I also want to thank the Ranking Member, Ms. Lawrence, for being the impetus and driving force behind holding this hearing today, and I now recognize Ms. Lawrence, the Ranking Member of the Subcommittee on the Interior, for her opening statement.
I want to say that it's a pleasure, and Madam Chairman, I thank you for helping me bring this issue forward and for your leadership. I want to thank all the witnesses here today for appearing, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. You've heard some of the statistics, and I'm sure the witnesses, you're very familiar with one of the concerns we have, and is that what is our plan? The amount of money that we're paying on to address invasive species to me, should not be spent without a comprehensive plan. I recognize that our, Dr. Reaser, you are new, and so we're looking forward to hearing what your vision and what the plan is. Invasive species pose serious problems to our environment. We understand that, but it's also a significant challenge to the conservation of native fish and wildlife. No habitat or region is immune from the threat of invasive species. As our chair mentioned, we spend over $125 billion each year controlling these plants and animals and repairing the damage they inflict on our property and our natural resources. As we talk about our environment, you cannot leave out the impact that invasive species have. In Michigan, I want to talk to you about that, and one of the reasons why this is so important to me, zebra mussels are a serious economic threat to our recreational fishing and commercial activity in the Great Lakes. And we in Michigan are passionate about our Great Lakes and our water, and so when you start seeing the impact of these invasive species, this rises to a level of being a very serious concern. The zebra mussels alone has caused more than $1 billion in damage by clogging the pipes and the filtration equipment of municipalities and industrial water systems. They've also damaged boats and decks, and it costs Michigan more than $250 million a year to clean those affected pipes and machinery. The Great Lakes we're also facing a threat from the Asian carp, which can devastate recreational fishing if not controlled. According to the University of Michigan Sea Grant Institute, recreational commercial fisheries contribute in excess to $4 to $7 billion to the economy each year. Recent reports show that these invasive fish have already caused significant problems in our Ohio and Mississippi River basins. Only a few weeks ago, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of Natural Resources confirmed the existence of 2 new invasive species in water. In 2014, the administration reports it allotted an estimated $2.3 billion across the range of federal agencies and activities to control and eradicate these species. I recognize that this issue requires a long-term plan, and that's what I want to hear today. I also understand that scientists are working around the clock to remedy this, to create a remedy for this problem. Since the plan has not been revised since 2008, even though the regulations, it is required to issue an update every 2 years. One of the things that I am looking for is a commitment for compliance, and that's something that, as part of this committee, I'll be looking for in the future. While we have not updated our plan, we know that the invasive species problem has worsened, and I feel strongly that a lack of a comprehensive plan on how to deal with this is contributing to the impact. I hope to get some answers today on this issue so that important safeguards can be put in place to manage this ever-increasing problem of invasive species. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the ranking member. I will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. The chair also notes the presence of the gentleman from Texas, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Hurd, a member of the full committee. We thank you very much for your interest in the topic today. And without objection, we welcome Mr. Hurd to participate fully in today's hearing. We now recognize our panel of witnesses. We're pleased to welcome Dr. Jamie Reaser, who is newly minted as the Executive Director of the National Invasive Species Council at the U.S. Department of the Interior. Welcome, Dr. Reaser. Mr. Scott Cameron, President of the Reduce Risks from Invasive Species Coalition. Thank you, Mr. Cameron. Dr. Alan Steinman, you're the director as well as a professor at the Robert B. Annis Water Resources Institute at Grand Valley State University. Am I correct? Thank you, Dr. Steinman. And Dr. George Beck, professor of weed science at Colorado State University. I studied weed science at the University of Wyoming under a colleague of yours, probably one that was teaching me before you were born. But welcome today, Dr. Beck. Pursuant to the committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify, so please rise and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. Now, in order to allow time for discussions, please limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record, so we'll have the advantage of it in case it is longer than 5 minutes. And we'll begin with Dr. Reaser. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Turn your mic on.
Madam Chairman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to participate in the hearing on behalf of the National Invasive Species Council, NISC. With me today is Ms. Ann Kinzinger, U.S. Geological Survey's Associate Director for Ecosystems. I will summarize my written testimony, which has been provided for the record. NISC was created by Executive Order 13112, known as the Invasive Species Executive Order, on February 3, 1999, to serve as an independent coordinating body for the federal efforts to address invasive species. As you've noted, the Secretary of Interior serves as a co-chair of NISC along with the Secretaries of Agriculture and Commerce. The Secretary of Interior also hosts and oversees NISC staff. At this time, 10 additional departments and agencies are members of NISC. They are listed in my written testimony. As you may be aware, or are aware, I started as Executive Director of NISC staff just 9 weeks ago. That said, I'm not new to the invasive species issue. My work is largely focused on invasive species since 1999, not coincidentally the year in which the executive order was signed. But in actuality, my interaction with the invasive species issue goes back much further than that. My grandmother taught me to fish as a young girl. I can remember being frustrated by the fact that I couldn't catch anything other than carp. I desperately wanted to see pretty sunfish up close. Because the feeding habits of the carp muddied the water, I couldn't even see a sunfish near the dock. I did my doctoral work in the Great Basin, in Nevada, specifically at the southernmost extent of the species range of the Columbia spotted frog. During my time in the field, I became aware of numerous adverse shifts taking place in the lands and waters of the sagebrush ecosystem. The invasion of annual grasses, cheatgrass and medusa head, and the introduction of non-native amphibians and tropical fish, to name a few. Invasive species clearly warranted concern and concerted action. Since that time, I worked on various aspects of the invasive species issue in more than 40 countries, frequently helping other governments institutionalize their capacities to address the invasive species issue. In the course of my work, I've seen firsthand how invasive species can devastate the lives and livelihoods of people who depend on local resources. Invasive species impact everyone on a personal level, although we may not equally or fully recognize the extent to which they do. If we care about food security, water security, human health and well-being, animal welfare, employment, and the economy, in short, national security, we need to pay considerably more attention to this often subtle, yet nevertheless pervasive and costly issue, invasive species. The invasive species issue is dynamic and complex, coordinating activities of federal agencies and working with non-federal stakeholders to prevent, eradicate, and control invasive species throughout the U.S. and abroad is a substantial challenge. Thankfully, challenges can be overcome. 2 examples of successes to NISC's leadership include provision of expert advice from more than 100 individuals who have served on the Non-Federal Invasive Species Advisory Committee, also created by the executive order. This advice has strengthened federal programs and initiatives, such as our work on biofuels, and the implementation of the 2 national invasive species management plans that together contain more than 170 action items. Additional examples can be found in my testimony. As you are well aware, we are operating in a resource-constrained world. And due to limited resources, it's fair to say that NISC has not yet actualized its full potential. With the support of the Department of Interior, as well as 12 other NISC member departments and agencies, I intend to do all I can to mobilize NISC's leadership and capacities to effectively implement the Invasive Species Executive Order from the policy level to the ground level and back again. The work ahead includes, but is not limited to, NISC's 4 major functions: raising awareness of the linkages between invasive species and various aspects of national security as they relate to each department, setting priorities for international action that actually has impact at the ground level, fostering a culture of collaboration, innovation, and long-term commitment to problem solving, and facilitating teamwork across departments and between federal, state, tribes, and other stakeholders that not only results in invasive species prevented and eradicated, but ecosystems and ecosystem services restored. Thank you for time and for caring about this critically important issue. I'm happy to answer questions regarding NISC. Ms. Kinzinger is available to answer technical questions on species as needed.
Thank you, Dr. Reaser. The chair now recognizes Mr. Cameron for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, Ranking Member Lawrence, members of the subcommittee, my name is Scott Cameron. I am president of a nonprofit organization called the Reduce Risk from Invasive Species Coalition, or RISC. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on opportunities to improve invasive species policy and programmatic implementation in the United States. RISC is a 501c3 organization incorporated in 2014. Our mission is to educate the public on the risks posed by invasive species and to promote cost-effective strategies to reduce those risks. We pride ourselves in being bipartisan, with a distinguished advisory board comprised of former senior government officials from the Obama, Bush, Clinton, and Bush administrations. I'm pleased to say that since our inception, we have had a close working relationship with the Congressional Invasive Species Caucus, co-chaired by your own representatives Dan Benishek from Michigan and Mike Thompson from California. Invasive species pose serious economic and environmental problems across the country. They have been estimated to cost the American economy more than $120 billion a year and to have a $1.4 trillion annual impact on the global economy. There are significant public health impacts from invasive species. For instance, invasive species like West Nile virus and fire ants put many Americans in the hospital every year, and in some cases, they don't survive. Invasive species have single-handedly caused 20% of all species extinctions since the 1600s, and they've been implicated in up to half of all the species extinctions over the last 4 centuries. Indirectly, they cause increased regulatory burden on American society, since invasives are, in whole or in part, responsible for more than 40% of the listings under the Endangered Species Act. For example, widespread distribution of invasive cheatgrass in Wyoming and in Colorado was a key risk factor that almost led to the listing of the greater sage grouse under the Endangered Species Act earlier this year. If your constituents are concerned about loss of biodiversity and species extinctions in the United States, then they should also be concerned about invasive species. If your constituents are frustrated by the regulatory burden imposed by the Endangered Species Act, that's another reason to be concerned about invasive species, because they're putting a lot of species on the ESA list. I would now like to offer a number of recommendations on how institutional arrangements could be improved to yield better results in invasive species management for our country. Congress should direct the National Invasive Species Council to present the Congress with a short annual work plan, 5 pages in length, to include deadlines and intended outcomes of council activities. This would help focus the political level attention in the agencies on the invasive species problem. The National Invasive Species Council should provide a forum for federal interagency communication and coordination with regional governors associations, like the Southern governors, the Western governors, and so on. NISC should design a national network of regionally driven early detection and rapid response capabilities whose regional priorities are established based on the advice of the governors of those states in those regions. NISC should provide a forum for federal agency regional executives, BLM state directors, regional foresters, EPA regional administrators, and so on, so that those regional officials could more easily get the attention of the departmental political leadership in headquarters and the Office of Management and Budget. And through a more coordinated policymaking at the headquarters level, achieve better on-the-ground coordination at the local level. The Council should provide a forum for ensuring and expediting interagency coordination at the headquarters level so that time-sensitive decisions involving invasive species policy, regulatory approvals, or research are less likely to be caught up in bureaucratic red tape in D.C. As an example, facilitating Endangered Species Act Section 7 consultation between USDA and EPA on new pesticides targeting invasive species, working with the Council on Environmental Quality to streamline environmental compliance for agency on-the-ground invasive species control actions, and achieving interagency biocontrol research agenda that would effectively leverage the relative scientific strengths of EPA, USGS, USDA, and the National Science Foundation. Another recommendation, NIST should seek out and evaluate international best practices and explore the feasibility of adopting those best practices in the United States. It looks like I'm over time, so I'll stop, Mr. Chairman, and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. The Chair recognizes Dr. Steinman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Buck, Ranking Member Lawrence, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today with regard to the threats posed by invasive species, and in particular, their impacts in the Great Lakes region. There are 4 areas that I would like to cover today. The first is invasive species and the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes serve as the poster child for aquatic invasive species. It's now estimated since the 1800s, over 180 non-native species have invaded the Great Lakes ecosystem. The Great Lakes are a national treasure. They hold over 20% of the world's surface fresh water and over 90% of the surface fresh water in the United States. The importance of this resource, both in terms of water quantity and water quality, cannot be overstated, given the increasing concerns over water security in this nation and around the world. Aquatic invasive species are acutely felt in the state of Michigan, which touches 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. Our governor likes to say that 4 of the 5 Great Lakes favor Michigan, and where 1 in 5 jobs are linked to water. The second area I'd like to talk about are the ecological impacts in the Great Lakes. These include habitat loss, food web disruption, and alterations to native fisheries. 2 aquatic invasive species that have been particularly problematic in the Great Lakes are the sea lamprey and the dreissinid mussels, which include the quagga and zebra mussels. The sea lamprey, for those not familiar with it, is an eel-like parasite whose native habitat is the ocean. It got into the Great Lakes after the Welland Canal was improved and it bypassed the Niagara Falls. By 1938, they had reached all of the Great Lakes. Sea lamprey parasitism is not a pretty sight. They attach to fish with a suction cup mouth, then dig their teeth into fish flesh, and finally feed on the fish body fluids by secreting an enzyme that prevents the blood from clotting. The lake trout harvest in the upper Great Lakes has declined from about 15 million pounds per year before the sea lampreys to approximately 300,000 pounds now, a decline of 98% of this critical fish. The good news is the sea lamprey control program is very effective. We have to apply it every year, though, and it costs about $20 million per year. The zebra and quagga mussels also have caused extensive damage. They came in through ballast water discharge. The zebra mussel was first found in 1988 in Lake St. Clair, quickly followed by its larger and more aggressive cousin, the quagga mussel. These organisms, in fact, the quagga mussel is now estimated to have about 950 trillion, that's with a T, in Lake Michigan alone. That's a huge number. They're filter feeders. They are literally sucking the bioenergetic life out of Lake Michigan. Once you decline the algae levels, they're lower than they are in Lake Superior. There's no food for the zooplankton to feed on. When there's no zooplankton, there's no food for prey fish to feed on. And when there's no prey fish, there's no food for the top predators, the salmon, the lake trout to feed on. So the devastation to the food web and the economic impacts are enormous, which leads me to the third area I would like to talk about, the economic influences of invasive species in the Great Lakes. In Michigan, especially affected by aquatic invasive species, the industries influenced or affected are power generation, industrial facilities, tourism, and sport and commercial fisheries, which account for about 30,000 jobs and almost $12 billion in annual sales based on 2010 data. As Representative Lawrence mentioned, the commercial and recreational fishery industry in Great Lakes is estimated to be between $4 and $7 billion, and they are a critical risk by the presence of these invasive species. And finally, I'd like to address the management implications. With the Asian carp at the entryways of the Great Lakes, we must be coordinated in our approaches to monitor our waterways to keep invasive species from getting into the Great Lakes, quarantine them when necessary and where possible, and then finally eradicate them when feasible. It's critical to recognize that in a hydrologically connected system like the Great Lakes, the program to control aquatic invasives is only as strong as the weakest link in that chain. Regardless of how vigilant or aggressive Michigan may be in dealing with aquatic invasive species, its waters remain vulnerable if any of the other 7 Great Lakes states or 2 Canadian provinces are not as equally vigilant or aggressive. And this concept of vulnerability applies well beyond aquatic ecosystems. It applies to any connected ecosystem that crosses jurisdictional boundaries, whether it's water, land, or air. It's clear that we needed a coordinated effort to tackle invasive species instead of jumping from one crisis to another, and good science is needed to make informed management decisions. I clearly understand the role of science, having worked in the Everglades restoration before I came to Michigan, and I recognize that science doesn't dictate policy, it helps inform policy. But let me leave you with this one thought taken from Peter Glick, one of the foremost water resource scientists on the planet. It's very difficult to make good public policy without good science, and it's even harder to make good public policy with bad science. Thank you again for the invitation to appear before you today.
Thank you, Dr. Steinman. The chair recognizes Dr. Beck for a 5-minute opening.
Chairman Buck, Ranking Member Lawrence, and honorable members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I am George Beck, and I'm a professor of weed science at Colorado State University. Today, I represent the Healthy Habitats Coalition, and we are a diverse alliance dedicated to improving invasive species management in our country. In spite of almost 3 decades of efforts by many organizations working to persuade the federal government to do a better job controlling and managing invasive species, little progress has been made. Zebra and quagga mussels are in the Great Lakes, and Asian carp is poised to invade those bodies. Cheatgrass, knapweeds, and tamarisk abound in the west. Burmese pythons, Melaleuca and hydrilla are wreaking havoc in Florida. Their emerald ash borer and other invasive insects are invading the Northeast and Midwest. All of these are spreading rapidly, and every state has invasive species without exception. Cheatgrass alters habitat so significantly that it is clearly linked to the decline of the greater sage grouse and its habitat. We possess, however, the knowledge and ability to recover cheatgrass-infested sage-grouse habitat if we would just seize the initiative to do so. For example, CSU weed scientists just completed a comprehensive study to demonstrate such success, and we also have developed approaches to target and eliminate the cheatgrass soil seed reserve, which then will provide the best opportunity to recover native species habitat. The invasive species conundrum in the U.S. is not necessarily due to a lack of knowledge. Rather, it is because of chronically poor federal land management agency performance around managing invasive species. And this is a reflection of chronically poor administrative leadership concerning invasive species. Leadership from the National Invasive Species Council is practically non-existent. NISC is made up, of course, of most of the President's cabinet. Most prominently, the members are the co-chairs, Secretaries of Agriculture, Commerce, and Interior. Frankly, NISC could be dissolved, and the funds used to operate that body should be spent on decreasing the population abundance of invasive species and recovering native species habitat. This poor federal performance is due to at least 4 things that we've been able to identify: inconsistent budgets and non-transparency in the invasive species budgeting process, a lack of collaboration, prioritization, and on-the-ground performance with state and local governments, using NEPA as an excuse for inaction or justification to postpone making timely management decisions, and poor administrative leadership to develop appropriate invasive species public policy, management, and budgetary action. The solution to these problems has been introduced as bills. H.R. 1485 and S. 2240, the Federal Lands Invasive Species Control, Prevention, and Management Act. The bills focus on the Forest Service, the BLM, National Park Service, and Fish and Wildlife Services. These are the major federal land management agencies. The bills require agencies to develop an invasive species strategic plan. They foster agreements with states and local governments. The bill also has categorical exclusions that will protect high-value sites from invasive species, fully support and facilitate the development of early detection and rapid response, and then years and years of analysis to approve new management tools. The bills also require invasive to stay ahead of expansion rates and change the spending parameters. And these would be 75% of invasive species funds to those agencies. We have to be put on the ground. Not more than 15% of those funds can be spent on awareness and research, and up to 10% on administration. So the bulk of the money will be directed towards healing the problem. HHC has many supporters for these efforts, including an invasive species resolution from the Western Governors Association and direct support from Governor Butch Otter from Idaho, Governor Cecil Andrus, who's a former governor of Idaho and a former Secretary of Interior, and Governor Martinez from New Mexico. There is no federal administrative leadership on invasive species. It is up to Congress to pass strong leadership and pass these bills. Doing so will place our country on the road to begin solving the invasive species problem. We must stop kicking this can down the road. Thank you again for this opportunity to share HHC's thoughts on invasive species management in the U.S.
Thank you, Dr. Beck, and go Rams. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes, and will recognize himself first. Dr. Reaser, how does NIST coordinate its work with federal agencies and states and local communities to combat invasive species?
Hi, thank you for the question. NIST coordinates work through a series of tiers of coordination. NIST itself, as you're aware, are the secretaries and administrators of the 13 member departments. And then within the NIST structure, broader structure, we also have policy level leads and more technical level leads. There are interdepartmental coordination mechanisms throughout that structure. There are also coordination mechanisms between NIST and other structures focused on invasive species task force, and there are regular joint working groups and joint committees and joint products with that group and others. And then there are on-the-ground activities where federal agency on a species-by-species specific level.
What is the annual budget for NISC?
For the NISC staff?
What's the total budget, I guess? And then if you want to break it down, you can explain.
Okay, so the approximate budget for the NISC staff is about $1 million per year, and about a third of that, 30%, is spent on administering the Invasive Species Advisory Committee.
And approximately what percentage of the overall budget goes to administrative expenses?
So approximately, for the NISC staff, just to clarify, it's about 65% would be salary, travel, basic operations, and then approximately 30% would be for the advisory committee's administration.
Dr. Beck, cheatgrass continues to cause problems with sage-grouse habitat. Could you please describe the current status of the cheatgrass threat and what actions have been taken to mitigate its spread?
Cheatgrass is a controversial plant relative to how much area it occupies. I have heard data everywhere from 50 million to over 100 million acres, so it's really hard to know. It has not found its way everywhere. For example, 10 years ago was the first time cheatgrass showed up in the Gunnison Basin in south central Colorado. And in the Kremling area, which is 150 miles north, it's only been there for about 5 years. Or at least that's what people say. So it continues to find new homes. The Great Basin is obviously very inundated with it. It's not so bad that you can close your eyes and point and be looking at cheatgrass, whether you know it or not, but we're getting close to that. It's there every year. I mean, I hear people talk about, well, it's not a bad year for cheatgrass, and they say, wait till June. It's the same every June. And I even had a student in one of my classes tell me that His mother's neighbor was running around picking this grass from around his yard in the foothills above, I think it was above Estes Park area. And she wanted to know what he was doing. He said, well, this doesn't require any water. I don't know what it is. And he was planting cheatgrass. So, you know, Poga was right. We met the enemy, and they are us. So we continue to foster its spread through all kinds of means, some of them inadvertent and some of them not. But the problem is worsening constantly.
What do you think NISC can do to help with the cheatgrass problem?
NISC's role is to coordinate with federal agencies, and I educate a lot in the public. Half of my appointment is extension, and so I must give 50 visits with some federal employees that don't even know NISC exists. So there's a transitional law someplace between Washington, D.C. and the rest of the country.
Okay. Thank you. My time is almost up, and I recognize the gentlelady from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Reaser, I understand that the one update that has been made to the management plan was back in 2008. Is that correct? So help me understand why the council has largely not updated the management plan, and when will it be updated?
Okay, so let's step back to 2001. Thank you for the question. I think it's an important one. As you know, in the executive order, there's a request for the plan to be revised every 2 years. The reasons behind that were, of course, to set priorities, raise visibility, and so forth, all reasonable criteria. When the original plan was created, there was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm among the departments for this new culture of collaboration, and the request was to bring priorities together in a comprehensive manner, to use the word you used previously. The second management plan followed the pattern of the first management plan. It was a revision thereof. And so it had approximately 90 action items in it, as did the first one. There are 170 total. The second management plan ran 2008 through 2014. Since that time, there has been a process of moving the priorities forward from the first two management plans collectively. There's also been a process of looking at what items within those management plans require further work and how an evaluation process going forward. There has been a delay in the process of moving it to the third management plan for a couple of reasons. One, there have been unanticipated staff turnovers and vacancies that could not be accounted for and did have a significant impact on process. And then more recently, there was a desire to hire my position into place to take leadership over the third management plan, which I'm now in the process of doing, and we're looking forward to having that available sometime early next year.
Okay, I wanted to ask if it was achieving the objective of reducing the invasive species rate by 5% every year. Are you anywhere close to that goal?
So the invasive species management plan itself is a priority setting mechanism. So each item within the plan has different goals and objectives. Only a small percentage of those would be dedicated for activities related to weeds on the ground. As those projects move forward, each of them is going to have a goal that's context specific. A number of 5%, 15%, 20% is not necessarily going to be fit to purpose for all circumstances. So each of the activities undertaken through the plan or otherwise is going to set a goal that makes sense context specifically.
So are you reaching any of those goals?
Yes, many of those goals have been reached through this process.
One of the things that the plan is my understanding that we as member of Congress should know that the plan is being updated, and I can tell you that has not been a reality. So you're saying you're making a commitment here today that your plan will be updated by spring of next year, and I expect that we will know that that has happened under your leadership. Is that correct?
I'm willing to be personally accountable on that one. There aren't many things that I can promise you, but that one I can assure you under my leadership will happen as soon as it's feasibly possible.
I have to come back for another round of questions, but I do want to ask this. With your knowledge, now that you're in the position, do you have the funds or the resources to actively, once we get a plan, to implement it and to be able to state to Congress and to the people of the United States that we have a very proactive and committed plan to addressing the Invasive Species Act? And I love the coalition, the comparison made between the endangered species. I think we get a lot of attention and affection when we start talking about endangered species, where you need to really talk about the invasive species, because that's a major component of why we have endangered. So when you submit the plan, will you be able to implement with your budget and resources?
It's a very, very good and pertinent question. We will make sure that where we have good alignment with current resources, that will be well recognized. There may be cases where there's an action item in the plan to mobilize additional resources or find efficiencies with existing resources, and we'll also work to identify that as well.
You're not willing to say if you have it yet or not? Is that what you're saying?
We haven't finished the plan yet, so
Okay.
it would be premature for me to...
I'll give you that.
Yeah,
I'll give
thank you.
Thank you.
I thank the lady from Michigan and I recognize the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, Dr. Reaser, the lower Colorado River is in the front lines battling the quagga mussel, so Dr. Steinman, we join you. And the salt cedar. The mussels threaten the Hoover Dam, the Davis Dam, Parker Dam, Imperial Dam, and the Central Arizona Project, all of which are part of my district in Arizona. These water systems supply electricity and drinking water to millions across the Southwest. Now, while the problem is massive in scale, its implications are felt locally and require local action to mitigate their spread. Municipal leaders and community organizations in my district, such as the Lake Havasu Marine Association, are prepared and willing to do their part, but need resources to do so. So my first question, what specific authorizations currently exist for funding mitigation programs that combat these mussels or salt cedars on a state or local level?
Thank you for the question. I don't have specific information available on those authorities, but I'd be happy to make
I'd like
that
to get them
information
because I
available to you.
think the gentleman, Dr. Beck, was making this comment. We have a lot of surface activity, but nothing down on the local level. And it is imperative that we leverage those resources. I'd also like to know the flexibility, what type of flexibility exists with matching funds from local and states and private partnerships for these authorizations. Do you have that either?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to invite Ann Kinzinger to
answer on that, but I did want to note that Fish and Wildlife Service does work to coordinate the development of state wildlife action plans. And when a species is listed as a species of management concern in those plans, then grants are available. So I don't think that's the full answer, so I think we will need to get back to you with some other authorities, but that's a major
I'd like to know that.
Yeah.
Stay right there. So I'm going to jump ahead here. According to Executive Order 131112, NISC is charged with producing a national management plan every 2 years that sets forth its goals for treating and eradicating invasive species. However, since 1999, NISC has only released 2 management plans, those in 2001 and 2008. Can you please explain why there's been such a delay in producing a management plan, and when does NISC plan to produce a national management plan?
Thank you for the question. To make it short, since I've answered a version of this already, the management plan between 2014, that's when the second management plan sunsetted, between 2012, and this management plan, there has been a process in place to identify which items in the second management plan need to be moved forward to the third management plan. A number of items are ongoing, understandably.
I get that, and I see the gentleman over here just wriggling, which is what I'm doing, is that there's so much bureaucracy up on top here, there's nothing trickling down to the local levels. And this is what's frustrating about this, is that we always have to set goals, we have to have objectives, and then we have to have outcomes. And if we don't have people on the local level included in those, we're never going anywhere. And this is what's so frustrating with this group. So I've got salt cedars on one side, I've got quagga mussels everywhere, I've got bison in the Yellowstone National Area in the Grand Canyon. This is frustrating when you're talking about invasive species because you have people with expertise and the manpower and willpower to do this, but they can't get any jurisdiction or leverage coming out of your department. Does that make sense to you?
I certainly understand and concur with your frustrations in terms of the priority of getting resources to the ground and
Yeah, but it's even worse than that because not just getting the resources, but these plans seem to get lost in your bureaucracy that are well-intentioned and have great outcomes, but they can't get any jurisdiction to say, we're going to work with you, let's move forward with this plan. I mean, it's just absolutely ludicrous with the folks back home what's going on with this.
I understand your concerns, and they're warranted. This is a substantial issue of concern that deserves priority attention. I can assure you that the third management plan will be available early next year.
Well, I'll stay I'm running out of time. I'll stay.
Chair, thanks. The gentleman from Arizona. I just want to make one thing clear, Dr. Reaser. I want to make sure we have the correct spelling of the assistant witness in this matter. If you could just spell your name for the record, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, I'm Ann Kinsinger. That's Ann with an E, last name Kinsinger.
Thank you very much. And the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Lawrence. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm so appreciative of you coming here to discuss this issue. Invasive species affect our economy, our environment, human health in many instances, and although we haven't focused on it today, and I didn't hear it in your testimonies, invasive species such as lionfish, brown tree snake, and even invasive sorghum seaweed have had a devastating effect on all aspects of the economic development, agricultural production, and tourism, particularly in my district in the United States Virgin Islands, and in some parts of southeastern United States. I note that several of my colleagues from invasive, voracious eating species that is not native to the waters in which they've come and have completely attempted in their eating habits to annihilate our own local fish. And our fishermen are up in arms. Our Department of Planning and Natural Resources are trying to create ways to deal with this invasive species, both in the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and particularly in Florida, areas of Florida as well. And there's been some success in controlling a few of the invasive species, but it's clear you all are completely aware that we need to do more. Ms. Reaser, according to the submitted testimony, you've taken on some really important initiatives, and one of those initiatives is to focus on national priorities and targeted outputs. I wanted to know if you could tell us what the national priorities are, and what do you mean by targeted outputs? And specifically, of course, my interest would be if the territories are included in those priorities.
Certainly, the territories are explicitly included in the work we do, and thank you for highlighting them in particular. They do face many challenges that are particular to island regions. As you're probably well aware, invasive species are one of the #1 threats to biodiversity in island contexts, and that's certainly been the case in the U.S. territories. The national priorities are set within the National Invasive Species Management Plan in terms of how the federal government is going to work together, but also with states territories, tribes, and other partners. So each management plan sets forward a new set of priorities, and so we'll have a new set early this next year.
And how is that determined? In what way? Is it by population? Is it based on economic determinants? What sets those priorities?
Ann Kinzinger would like to address that.
Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to say I'm not speaking to what will be in the plan, but that there are a number of scientifically based techniques that we can use. One of them is to model the invasivity of the animal once it's detected and try to get a sense of how quickly it will spread, and try to be able to understand what kind of impacts it's going to have, because there are many invasive species that come to the country and really don't cause much damage, don't spread very quickly. So we have a variety of tools that we're trying to use that managers and policymakers can deploy to understand how quickly and how damaging from both an ecological and an economic perspective.
Because the reason I was asking what are the benchmarks and how do you determine that is that more often than not, my area, the Virgin Islands, because it's seen that we are small in numbers, we're not as given the priorities. And I just wanted to share something with the committee today, and I'm asking that we show this picture, and I will pass this around, that this is what happens when the invasive species, the sorghum seaweed, which if you think about an island economy that's based on fishing and tourism, if that's sitting on your beach, it's going to affect your tourism tremendously on a regular basis. And that's on every beach in the Virgin Islands these last couple of months. So thank you. And if I'd ask unanimous consent to include this in the record. And I just wanted to then close with, I know I'm running out of time, Mr. Beck, if you could tell us if you feel that there needs to be a change and improvement in controlling this and how we set these priorities.
I am not familiar with the seaweed problem other than I'm just aware that it exists. I'm not the expert to ask on that. But if we do not have the information, it needs to be dealt with immediately. That seems to be the case with almost every new invasive species. You know, where are we scientifically on it? That's an excellent question to ask, and I think we need to address these species only, unfortunately, one at a time. But that's part of the challenge in this, and they all need to be addressed.
With no objection, the picture will be included in the record. And I just mentioned to the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands that Dr. Beck and I live close to each other, and we'd be glad to go to the Virgin Islands this time of year to look at the seaweed and, yeah, immediately. Great. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Reaser, we're going to come back again to Arizona. And as you know, the tamarisk or salt cedar has been spread throughout the Colorado River Basin. It has been especially damaging to areas in Arizona in my district along the Gila River. These invasive and thirsty shrubs steal already limited water to push out native plants, strain agricultural resources, and disrupt economic activity. In communities where the tamarisk invasion has developed into crisis, like Buckeye, Arizona on the Gila River, local and state leaders have developed action plans to eradicate the shrub and restore natural habitats. However, these mitigation plans, like I alluded to earlier, have gotten lost in the complicated web of federal invasive species policy or have been flat out resisted by the federal agencies themselves. So now, what has NISC done to engage communities and to empower them to leverage the local resources and expertise to address problems unique to their area?
Thank you for the question. To clarify, NISC itself is the secretaries and administrators of the 13-member departments. So they themselves would not be having a direct relationship with coordinating with the counties. However, many of the federal agency personnel working in that region have been involved in multi-stakeholder partnerships. You're familiar, I'm sure, with the Tamarisk Coalition. Yep. And through those on-the-ground efforts at better communication and coordination, requests for assistance, individual priority setting, information exercises and so forth are brought up through the federal agencies.
So now, is there any benefit or streamlining to this process in coordination with American Indian tribes?
Thank you for the question. Are you referring to the work with tamarisk in particular, or with NISC more broadly?
With any invasive species, but in this case, tamarisk, yes.
Thank you for the question. I can't answer specifically with regard to tamarisk. I can answer more broadly, if that's of interest.
Sure.
Okay. So within the framework of the Invasive Species Advisory Committee that I mentioned previously, there are 2 seats dedicated for tribal representatives. There have been 5 tribal individuals who have filled those seats to date. The tribes are also included in numerous specific actions that are implemented under the National Invasive Species Management Plan. They may participate in specific committees, working groups, or task teams as are of particular interest to the tribes. The most recent example would be the outreach to tribes and the inclusion of tribal representatives in the development of the early detection rapid response framework that will be released in the near future.
Well, but my question is there any mechanism in which that can streamline? I mean, they have jurisdictions that are synonymous as a sovereign entity, whether if it exempts on their property. Is there a streamlining mechanism, not just representation, but is there a streamlining possibility in utilizing the tribes within a problem?
Thank you for the question. The tribes themselves have not brought to our attention a request for that process. If they did, I think we would take it into consideration to look at ways to coordinate better. We certainly would welcome more tribal participation at all levels of the work within the NISC and the broader NISC framework.
Gotcha. Dr. Beck, I mean, you've seen this from the ground level. How would you orchestrate something in a comprehensive management plan that addresses the gentlelady from the Virginia Islands to Arizona to the Great Lakes, so that we have all these multiple applications going on? I mean, you're with CSU, right? Okay, yes. I've got ASU, U of A, NAU. I mean, there were pretty good resource out there. But how would you manage a plan like that from your level that would address a lot of these things and synchronize them that may not be so bureaucratically top-down driven?
Well, first, I think is to involve the people at the local level. What do they want to do? What is their land use vision? And then adapt from there. And then geographically, you have to start up at a high elevation, high waters, and then move downstream from there rather than trying to move up, because I've seen it go both ways, and it never works when you try to run upstream. But at any rate, visiting and getting input from the local community is absolutely essential.
I know we've been chasing the mussels upstream up to Colorado, so we know your plight
Yes,
there. Absolutely. Would you have one last question, Dr. Steinman? Would you have any other comments in regards to that process?
Well, I think the coordination is essential. Without that, things are going to break down. As I mentioned in the oral testimony and written testimony, these invasive species cross jurisdictional boundaries. Anytime you have these connected systems, the weakest link provides the problem there. So it's a science is really going to be a critical element to make things successful.
When you empower local people, you find people more adaptive to be protecting, right?
Absolutely, and I agree with Dr. Beck in the sense that if you don't know what their societal values are at that local land value, you're just not going to make a difference.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Arizona and recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cameron, I just want to ask a follow-up question. How do you feel the NISC is, from your organization, how effective is it? And what, you gave some recommendations. Does the plan drive the results? I would like to hear your opinion.
Thank you, Congressman. A couple of thoughts. The first is a plan is ultimately just a piece of paper. What you really need is commitment, at least at the assistant secretary level. More than commitment, active participation. You need assistant secretaries willing to spend 15% of their time worried about invasive species. Frankly, I don't think we've had that for quite a while. You need that leadership in order to drive coordination inside Washington, in order to provide air cover, if you will, for the people at the regional level, at the state level, who are trying to do the right thing. So a good plan is helpful, it's necessary, but it's by no means sufficient. What I think is really important, echoing some things we've heard before, is taking a lot of hints from the governors. Your own governor is really invested in invasive species issues. Even with Michigan's economic problems, he's had budget increases in the state budget for invasives. Governor Hickenlooper has been all over the cheatgrass issue from the very beginning in Colorado. So the federal government needs to pay attention to where the governors are coming from. The federal government can provide a forum for cooperation among the governors. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative in your part of the country, Ms. Lawrence, is one example of a fairly successful model. Maybe WGA could do the same thing on cheatgrass, for instance.
Well, Dr. Steinman, I introduced H.R. 19900, the National Sea Grant College Program, and we know it's administered within the National Oceanic and Administration, NOAA. Do you believe that Congress should reauthorize it and fund new university research? Because one of the things that I'm hearing, and who made the quote about good science versus good policy. So would you please comment on that?
Thank you, Representative Lawrence. I am a strong supporter of the National Sea Grant Program administered under NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It is really where the science, education, and outreach all come together on a local basis, and even though National Sea Grant seems to have a marine name to it, it applies to the Great Lakes as well. And so whether it's freshwater, saltwater, or estuarine systems, Sea Grant is really there at the local level, making a difference, educating people, and providing the science to help inform those management decisions that need to be made.
You know, one of the things that I really want to drive this point home is that we think about just fish in the water, but there's an additional effect of the zebra mussel and the increase of blue water algae, which resulted in the loss of drinking water to 400,000 Ohio citizens. Can you explain how this invasive species has an impact on our drinking water?
Yes, thank you for the question. So the zebra and quagga mussels, as I said, are filter feeders. So they're filtering out the organisms that are in the water. And by doing that, they're clearing the water. And as they clear the water, there's more opportunity for the blue-green algae or cyanobacteria to start to form in that system. Now, it also needs nutrients, as well as the light that's getting through the water column. The nutrients, particularly in the western basin of Lake Erie, were coming off of farm fields. You had that combination of fertilizer application, a big rainstorm that moved it all into the lake, and then you had enough light for the blue-greens to grow, the cyanobacteria, and because they release a toxin, in this case microcystin, which is toxic to humans, potentially toxic. That's what Toledo water supply just decided to shut down. Now, we've had algal blooms that are actually larger than the one last year that shut down the water supply, but it turned out that they didn't grow near where the water intakes were. So it really is it makes a difference where those blooms are forming, but that combination does create something. And I want to point out for Ms. Plaskett as well, that clearing of the water by the quagga and zebra mussels also results in a proliferation of what we call these green algae, filamentous green algae called Cladophora, very similar to your sargassum, that is washing up on the beaches of the Great Lakes and creating what we call muck. And nobody wants to go where that muck is. Just like in the Virgin Islands, we're seeing the same thing in the Great Lakes.
I know I only have a few seconds, but Dr. Reaser, this is where I want to connect your job with these immediate. So when we have an invasive species that is affecting drinking water, how does these issues rise to the level of you responding or being able to respond to this? And when you have a situation in Virgin Islands and everyone's sitting here like they didn't know it was happening, how do we, as a member of Congress, know that you're actually responding and attacking this, not just a report, but what is your action? And I'm sorry, I know I'm over, but this is important.
It is important, and thank you for the question. To clarify again, NISC itself is the secretaries and administrators of the 13-member departments. And in many cases, issues such as this don't necessarily have to rise to that level to get action. There are hopefully mechanisms in place in most states now and in some territories where there are state-level national invasive species councils. There are also plant councils and aquatic councils, and they can work to bring local levels to state-level attention. State-level attention can then be brought to federal partners and so forth, and hopefully at the appropriate level for getting response, whether that's a technical level response, an authority level response, or some other mechanism that needs to be put in place to assist. So ultimately, the response comes through partnerships and communications on up.
Thank you. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Chair thanks the gentlelady from Michigan and recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate our panelists being here today. Dr. Reaser, in your opening remarks, I appreciated how you provided context to this issue and how it's a national security issue. That's something, you know, I know a little something about. I spent 9 years as an undercover officer in the CIA chasing Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, you know, Iranian IRGC Quds Force, and it's great being able to use those talents and experiences, you know, going after invasive weeds and worms, all right? It's an important issue to the state of Texas, and in Texas, we're dealing with the branched broom rape, we're dealing with the old world bollworm, we're dealing with cheatgrass as well. And, you know, we've talked here today, and I guess my first question is more of a philosophical question. We've talked here today about how invasive species pose one of the greatest threats to the agriculture industries in the world, yet are the least funded and recognized. How can we change this mentality to become more proactive in protecting our industries?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a really good one and something that deserves a lot more time than what we have available to us. I think one of the challenges that has existed within this issue in the agricultural context is the long history of using the word pests and weeds, which don't galvanize the public's emotive response to this issue. A lot of people will equate weeds to dandelions, which are in their backyard and they don't feel are particularly threatening. The invasive species issue itself, because of examples that have been emerging from around the world, is getting more of the public's perspective on the real risks associated with these non-native organisms impacting them personally. And I think as we raise the profile of this issue, as we communicate case studies effectively, as we draw the relationships between these individual species and people's personal lives, whether that be in the agricultural context or otherwise, we will see additional calls for support in all sorts of ways, financial, technical, and otherwise. The human dimensions of this issue are of particular interest to me, and I would love to have a side conversation with you at another date if that's of interest to you.
It is of interest, and I appreciate that. And also in some of the specifics, not only in how do we educate, you know, folks about how critical of an issue this is. The old world bollworm poses a significant threat to corn, cotton, and other important crops throughout the U.S. And given that it reached Brazil and Puerto Rico, and that in June of this year, one worm was found in Florida, is there a federal protocol in place for an effective response to eliminate any isolated infestations before the pest spreads and becomes established in the U.S.?
Thank you for the question. I am not an expert on that species in particular. I do know that USDA has been working on eradicating the Texas boll weevil, if in fact we're talking about the same species, and that work has been mostly successful. I would like to follow up with you more specifically at a later date when I can get the specifics in front of me.
Great. I appreciate that and would welcome that. And my last question, there's been some conversations already on cheatgrass. The latest research suggests that targeting grazing at optimum times, either before the seed pods develop or after they drop, reduces recurrence on rangelands more than anything else we've tried. And given the tremendous wildfire issues and detrimental effects to sage-grouse habitat associated with cheatgrass, shouldn't research like this be a priority? And what are agencies doing to coordinate their efforts to streamline unnecessary environmental reviews for pilot projects and trials?
So, two different answers. Thank you for the questions. In terms of the grazing question in particular, there are nuances to the grazing that need to be looked at from a research perspective. There are a number of criteria that go into determining whether grazing is an effective technique in terms of managing cheatgrass. Those relate to the history of the land use, in particular the condition of the land, the microclimate that you're looking at, whether you're talking about grazing with cattle versus sheep, the density of the animals, even the breed of the animals can make a difference in terms of grazing habits. So there is various work going on to look at the best possible strategies for managing cheatgrass, and they may vary across, and likely will vary across the landscape. To get to the second part of your question, which I'm going to ask you to repeat.
Sure, it's what are the agencies doing to coordinate efforts to streamline unnecessary environmental reviews for pilot projects and initial trials?
Great, apologies, thank you for that. One of the priorities that emerged out of the Western Invasive Weed Summit that I attended 2 weeks ago was streamlining the NEPA process. This has been a priority for us for a number of years at this point in time, and we're going to continue to move ahead on looking at what we can do to provide better NEPA guidance and streamlining in the invasive species context into the new year.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back the time I do not have.
Chairman thanks the gentleman from Texas and recognizes the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to go back to something that we were talking about and that the ranking member, Ms. Lawrence, brought up. When you talked about this is layering and the responses that come from the local level to the state level to the federal level, you also talked about the management plan, and I know it's the specific task and the mandate of this group to really set those kind of guidelines and those prioritizations out. Can you give me an example of how this has worked in some of these invasive species? In your written testimony, you talked about the Asian carp, you talked about cheatgrass, we've given the example about the lionfish. How has this worked to address some of these issues? Or some of these specific invasive species issues?
Thank you for the question. You're particularly interested in the coordination mechanisms.
Well, I'm trying to find out some specificity, and because I just hear a lot of very general discussion about how the process works, and that the management plans are there to make this happen. But I haven't been given, and I haven't heard, maybe it was done, what specific examples you have of where this has worked and where the organization, where this group has actually made it effective against some of these invasive species.
Okay. So I want to clarify once again that the National Invasive Species Council is itself the secretaries and administrators of the 13-member federal departments. So when we start moving on to discussions about impacts on the ground, we're looking at the engagement at the agency level and agency
Right, but
personnel.
you set those priorities in that national plan and the management of how that's going to be done, isn't that right? And your coordination of all of these agencies.
The management plan sets out a series of actions to be taken over the life of the management plan.
And the management plan is how, in fact, these agencies are going to attack these invasive species issues, right?
The management plan sets out goals and objectives for achieving certain aims. It's not prescriptive in telling the agencies how specifically to move forward on that
But
particular
it
action
sets out
item.
and guidelines for these agencies on how this is supposed to be done? That's just a yes or a no. Does it?
It sets out priority actions for them. It doesn't explicitly
So
set
in setting
out
the
guidelines.
priorities for them, can you give me an example of how those priorities, having been set since this group has been made, how it has been effective in the invasive species fight?
Okay, so I can give you a specific example for what's happening on the ground right now within the work that's being done on cheatgrass. Under a second,
Is that the only one, is that the only way you're able to tell me what is working on? You're not able to tell me what has been done and what has been effective in the past as yet?
I can go through a number of action items in the plan. There are 170 various action items, and I can go through with you at a later date.
Are there too many action items?
Pardon?
Are there too many action items, maybe? If I give my kids too many chores, they'll never get to any of them completed.
I understand your concern with the number of activities in the action items, and I can assure you in the next management plan,
I'm not
there will be
concerned, you
far
just
fewer.
cited so many of them as a reason why you're not able to tell me which ones they've completed.
I don't have, well, I can pull out the two management plans at the moment, and I could go through them with you. We don't have time, obviously, to do that right now. It's something we could sit down
I just
and
asked
do
for
together.
one example.
So one example in a management plan was to provide resources to develop an international infrastructure for sharing information on invasive species. It's actually taken place to result in that. The Global Invasive Species Information Network was created that is housed by the U.S. Geological, a global database, you could call it a global encyclopedia through an organization known as CABI. That provides information that can be used in the agricultural sector and the environmental sector and otherwise to inform decision-making such as risk analyses and risk assessments on the invasive species issue.
And any of these, have you been able to show where the action items, the action that's been taken has actually scaled back the invasive species, or what the impact that those have had on the particular areas that they've affected?
At this point in time, without actually going to the agencies and asking for that
How
particular
can you
data.
ask? That's the ultimate goal of the group. Wouldn't that be something that you would know immediately to be able to say that what you have been working on all these years, this is the outcome, and this is how we've been able to beat back this national crisis, this national security issue?
I understand your concern, and if the management plan action items were specifically targeted towards an on-the-ground response, that would be feasible, and I can collect that information. Many of the items in the management plans are actually focused on enhancing coordination, cooperation, efficiencies in resource spending, partnerships with states and tribes and other governments.
Isn't all of that the ultimate goal is to eradicate the invasive species?
They're all creating the enabling environment to allow that to
Dr.
happen.
Reaser, that's just yes or no? Isn't that the ultimate goal of the organization, is to do that?
The ultimate goal
Yes,
of the
no?
National Invasive Species Council is to facilitate coordination and cooperation, the specific duties that are outlined in the executive order.
To what end?
Ultimately, to the end of preventing and
So the answer
controlling and
would be-
eradicating invasive species. However, the activities are often many steps removed from what's happening on the ground. So the ability to say we've created an invasive species database is creating an enabling environment to enable people on the ground, whether that's cheatgrass or zebra mussels or weevils in Texas, to make a difference. However, being able to say that the data in that database directly resulted in 300 infestations being intercepted in the field is understandably quite difficult.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair thanks the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands and recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here and for their testimony. I've got a question about how some of these invasive species enter the country, and I just want to ask Dr. Reaser, is there, I know that the Department of Agriculture, Department of Interior are involved, but is there an ongoing discussion about, for instance, sportsmen have brought in certain plants that they think are good for wildlife that have turned out not so well. This has been the case in Alabama. And I think as we talk about how to deal with the invasive species who are already here, we need to be talking about how we can prevent some of them from being brought into the country. Can you tell me what kind of activity takes place, what kind of discussions, what kind of strategic planning is going on to prevent that?
Thank you for the question. We generally discuss these in the context of pathway interdiction and prevention at the border. And as I'm sure you're well aware, there are numerous controls in place at our ports of entry, both in the agricultural side and on the wildlife and human health side, to intercept organisms before they come into the States. There also are mechanisms in place to interdict various pathways by which organisms may be introduced, whether that's through horticulture or other means. One of the ways in which we're adding value at this point in time is to increase our capacities for risk analysis, our ability to look at species before they come to the United States and determining what's the likelihood of those organisms being harmful if they arrive here, so that we can proactively make choices about which species to let in and which species to prohibit.
When these things are brought in, there was I think it's an Asian version of oak trees that was brought in that a lot of people thought was a great idea for deer and wild turkey. Have now decided that it's not. Is there any effort to limit the introduction of something like that so that you've got a 5-10 year period to determine if it's problematic, or what's the process?
So ideally, risk analyses are informed by the best available science that you have. They also take other values and economic concerns into consideration. So if that or any organism became an issue of concern for importation into the United States, a risk analysis could be taken, could take place, and it could be determined based on the output of that risk analysis whether there were reasons to prohibit that organism, whatever it happened to be, and authorities in place to then follow up with the prohibition.
In the South, we've had to deal with an invasive species called kudzu, and but we've also been dealing with an invasive weed called Kogan grass, and I think it came into the country as packing material. And that, again, it gets back to the collaboration between the various federal agencies and departments of government to make sure that if we bring something in, that it doesn't have the capacity, first of all, to reproduce, which I think that surprised a number of people when that happened. But in that regard, Dr. Beck, you're the weed specialist. What impact does the NEPA process have on the efforts to control the spread of invasive weeds like cheatgrass, and is it helping or hurting these efforts, or other things like Kogan grass, for instance?
My apologies, I didn't hear the one word. My hearing's horrible. The NEPA, you said?
Right, NEPA,
okay, all right.
NEPA.
My experience personally with NEPA is with working with others that I've had to do battle with, and I guess that's the term that they would prefer to use. It can be an onerous process. It is by design meant to be thorough, but it doesn't. I mean, one doesn't have to take 10 years to make a decision. I think the process is good when it's used as it's supposed to be used, but unfortunately, we were in situations where there seems to be a lot of misuse. And in other words, the people who are making the assessment simply don't want something coming in, or they don't care, and it can go either way. So NEPA is a problem that needs to be addressed and streamlined.
My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Alabama and recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan.
I want to thank you all for being here. For my last set of questions, Mr. Cameron, I agree with your suggestion that Congress should direct the council to furnish us with a short annual work plan to help focus attention on the council's work. Ms. Reese, do you have any objection to that suggestion?
Thank you for the question, and I appreciate the suggestion that Scott Cameron has brought forward. My request would be that any reporting be tied into the National Invasive Species Management Plan process so that the reporting on that can happen concurrently with any requests, so that we're making sure that we're being efficient in our reporting processes. The current reporting for the National Invasive Species Management Plan is set at the executive order for 18 months after each management plan, and as we move forward, we intend to report out on that time frame.
I would strongly recommend that as you are working on the plan, that you look at providing us with updates. I want to ask Dr. Steinman, what can the federal government do to be helpful in your efforts in curbing invasive species in the Great Lakes? What can the federal government do? I'm a little concerned that we have a plan that doesn't really cause action. It's a plan. So please tell me, what can we do?
Well, thank you, Representative Lawrence. It really depends on the vector that we're talking about for introduction, because there are so many different ways that invasive species can get into the Great Lakes or into any ecosystem. So again, that coordination is really critical. If you're talking about species that are coming in from ballast water introduction, then it's critical that the EPA, the U.S. Coast Guard are all working together. The Canadian government as well as the U.S. government are working together to make sure that none of these salties are discharging any of the ballast water organisms that would get in that way. But in many cases, some of these organisms are being introduced just by unintentional means or through the live aquaculture trade. And that's when USDA needs to come into play. So again, it gets down to coordination. I know this is a common refrain we've been hearing, not just amongst the federal government, although that's an important resource for us, not just in terms of their management strategies, but in terms of resources, monetary resources, but then working with the state and local agencies as well to make sure that that plan, once developed, is coordinated and can be implemented in a rigorous way.
Thank you so much. I want the panel to know, Dr. Reese, that I am looking forward to that and to that report on your leadership, but leadership is needed. All the members who have spoken here, we represent different parts of this country. And the issues that we're talking about, and we've covered it, it's economic, it's our water quality, it's recreational, it's jobs, it's our economy. All these things are tied to this. And it seems like there's been this kind of whatever attitude. And under your leadership, and it's something that's going to be a priority for me as a member of Congress, is that we continue to put the focus and the energy. This is not a job to come in and just kind of sit on the side because nobody cares what you're doing. You have a tremendous background when you talk about your resume, and so you understand the impact of this. And this hearing to me is important because this is a major impact. You know, I'm from the Great Lakes, but you heard Texas, you heard Florida, you heard the islands. This is something that requires the commitment and the passion. And I'm sitting here, I'm looking forward to that leadership. I'm going to be actively looking for that report. And this issue of coordinating the levels of government is extremely important, and I expect for the plan to lay out that process so that we have a process where it's not, at least there's a plan, where if I'm a governor, this is the layers and this is how we move forward, and there is a process for that. So I want to thank you all for your you being here and your expertise. I yield back my time, sir.
The Chair thanks the gentlelady from Michigan. And in closing, I'd like to thank our witnesses for taking the time to appear before us today. If there is no further business, without objection, subcommittee stands adjourned.